We had a couple moments where we just looked at each other and we laughed and we were like, did you ever think that we would be sitting here like splinting our infant child's leg?
Yeah.
Like, it's just wild to think about.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were learning all this stuff all at once, and it was a lot.
Hello. You're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney. Today I have episode 82 with Kim Arnold. Kim is mom to 1.5-year-old Julianne, who was born with a rare syndrome called osteogenesis imperfecta, also known as brittle bones disease. Because of this syndrome, Julianne's bones fracture incredibly easily and often. In this episode, Kim shares what it was like to have a picture-perfect pregnancy, only to find out hours after delivering Julianne that she had fractured a rib and an arm, which led to the discovery of a very rare and intimidating diagnosis. We really dive into what the first days were like, as well as the first handful of months after discharge. Spoiler alert, it was really hard. We also discuss the beautiful impact that Julianne's medical complications have had on their family's view of the simple things in life, and the ways that her marriage was also impacted. I had so much fun recording with Kim. So much fun. We definitely hit it off, and I hope that that energy is contagious. You're gonna love Kim. Kim, her husband Brian, and little Julianne live in Dallas, Texas. She works in staffing and sales and is a lover of coffee and baking. Let's dive in. Hi, Kim. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. I'm really excited to hear about, your journey with Julianne and how she's affected you and your life. So I would love for you to start out with a very brief explanation of Julianne and a little bit about her diagnosis and just how it affects her.
Yeah. So Julianne is a year and a half old now. Just like the sweetest, happiest kid in the whole world. She was born with osteogenesis imperfecta, which is brittle bones disease. It just means that she's really, really fragile. So she has broken a lot of bones in her days. It's affected, a lot of different things, but mainly the fact that she's just a very fragile girl. She's our little glass doll.
And she's in a lot of surgeries, right? Like I feel like you've talked about that on Instagram and stuff.
Yeah, thank God for modern medicine. There are surgeries that she can get. And so she's had what's called a rotting surgery in her legs to strengthen the bone. And then we are actually this month heading for another surgery. She will get the same surgery in her arms.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Thank God for modern medicine. I agree with that so wholeheartedly, and great doctors and people who have paved the way. Yay for them.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So I would love to hear your story. So let's start with when you first found out or knew that Julianne had any kind of medical issues. I know sometimes we don't have like an exact diagnosis right at first, but you're before and after, I guess. So let's start with that moment.
Okay. So we had a perfect pregnancy. Like there were never any issues. Everything was right on track. So we had no idea that anything, I guess, was going on. It wasn't until the day that she was born that, she was born and everything was great. They handed her to me, etc. But then they immediately took her for like her, what is it, like the newborn check that they do. And so they wheeled us to our room and they said, we're just going to check her out and then we'll bring her right to you. You guys will meet up in your room. When that happened, instead of bringing her back, we had a NICU doctor come see us. And he said, Julianne's arm is broken. And so he said, this could be totally normal. He said some kids break their clavicle, et cetera, et cetera. So it could be fine, but we do need to keep her in the NICU to see what happened and make sure that she's okay. So obviously we were, nervous and freaking out a little bit. But we had a lot of hope that it was nothing. It wasn't really until they brought us to the NICU to talk to us that the NICU doctor said, we did an x-ray on her arm. And in that, we did an x-ray on her chest and saw that she actually has a broken and healed rib fracture.
Wow.
Which means that she had broken her rib while she was in utero, and it had healed on its own while she was still inside of me. So we didn't know that had happened. Obviously, it's so small, they would never have seen that on like an ultrasound or anything like that. Yeah. After that, he said, that's a really significant finding that leads us to believe that this could be something called osteogenesis imperfecta, which is brittle bones disease. And that was the first time that we had ever heard those words in our lives. And the NICU doctor was so kind. He gave us all of this research to look through. He talked us through kind of what that means, what it could mean, what it couldn't mean. And yeah, that's the moment that we, I guess, found out that something had happened.
Wow. I'm just picturing like this really typical pregnancy and really typical birth. And then to be like, oh, your newborn's arm is broken would just be so out of left field. Like, what do you mean they broke a bone? Like I've heard of a clavicle breaking too, but I don't know that like that would be even on your radar for her to break a bone in birth. And especially if there weren't any like huge, issues happening while you were giving birth.
Right.
And then to picture her breaking a rib while she was inside of you, how did that feel to like know that had happened while you were pregnant with her and you had no idea?
I mean, probably as awful as you think it would.
Yeah.
Just because it's like, that's the place where they're supposed to be safe. And like you're carrying them around and, as a mom, like you develop this really special bond with your belly and you're talking to your belly and all this stuff. And so to find out that she had actually had some sort of pain while she was in there and I didn't know, at the time, it was hard. And then, yeah, like you said, to find out that she'd broken her arm and she's like this tiny, tiny, frail little thing. She was only like 7 pounds, was just crazy. I mean, I just didn't know what to think.
Yeah. I think there's something about things like that happening when you're not aware of it as a parent, where you're like, especially as a mom, I think, where you're like, how would I not know this? Like, I should have known. Like, and even though, like, obviously, no one expected you to know that happened, right? But I imagine that, it does feel a little unsettling. Like, for me with Kimball, where I can't remember how far along they are, but when they're like, oh, now the baby can hear you and they have light perception in there. And so talk to your belly and I was like expecting him to know my voice and everything. And then, for him to be born and then to find out that he couldn't hear us or see was like, oh, like how did I not know that? Where obviously there's no way I could have known that, but I don't know. I think there's something unsettling about not knowing something like that about your baby. And especially when they're inside of you, like it feels so intimate.
Yeah, absolutely. I had all the emotions and all the thoughts when that happened. It was like you said, like that's supposed to be their safe place. And what was crazy was that when I was pregnant, I actually had a lot of anxiety around my pregnancy for no reason. Like everything was going well. And my doctors kept telling me everything was perfect. And my husband was always like, everything's fine. Everything's going great. But I had some weird anxiety around it. I think it was just because it was my first pregnancy. But all in all, to like find that out afterward, it just was a lot for me to take in.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. It does make me wonder, like, could that have been something? Like, could that have been like a motherly
intuition?
Yeah. Like something's up and I don't know what. And there's nothing like showing that anything's wrong. So it must just be nothing or, first time mom stuff, which it could have been a combo, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, I remember being super nervous throughout my whole pregnancy, but I didn't have any reason to. So it was like little bits here and there where I would like freak out and like, what if something goes wrong? You know what I mean? But
Mm.
all in all, I was sure that like our pregnancy was perfect and everything was going well. So like I didn't have any reason to worry. It was just like random mom anxiety, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
kind of fast forwarding to the moment when you found out
Hmm.
about this diagnosis, about her fractured rib and her broken arm. You mentioned that you had all the feelings that was really hard. What was going on for you the following days after finding that out? Like, how did you handle that? What did that look like for you?
Honestly, um, it was really tough because she was in the NICU for like 3 or 4 days before she was moved to the PICU. And the way our hospital is structured, the postpartum unit, like where we were, was on the other side of the building where the NICU was. So I was determined to breastfeed and still spend that time with her. So I was waking up every 3 hours. I was exhausted. My husband would walk me to the other side of the building to the NICU to try and breastfeed her, to sit with her, to still have that like comfort time. But it was really, really tough because in between those moments, obviously, I would come back to the room, I would cry, I would Google, which now I'm like, you should never Google things when you're going through a hard time.
Yeah.
Like never Google anything your doctor tells you because it's just worse.
But
Just
that's
makes it
hard
worse.
though. It's hard not to. Like I can imagine
Yeah.
being in the room and be like, what do I do with this
Yeah.
information? And trying to project what your life might be like. I can see why you did it, but I can also see why that was hard.
Yes. Like Googling everything and, it's hard, but, I
Mm.
was, on the internet, I was researching, I was reading through the research that our doctor had given us. I was talking to family members, and then I was trying to get like, 10 minutes of sleep in between feedings and then walking again from one side of the hospital to the other. And what was really tough was we did have one nurse that like very first night when we had found out that osteogenesis imperfecta was what we were looking at as a potential diagnosis. And she actually told me that I couldn't hold her because she was too fragile and because she was still in pain from her arm. And so she wouldn't let me hold her for that whole shift that she was on.
Hmm.
And that was really, really tough for me because at that point, I still had this hope that like she's fine and, she'll heal from her arm and maybe it'll be fine. But the nurse looking at me and telling me, you know, she's too fragile for you to hold her. That just like broke my heart and it made me feel like this is a million times more real than I thought it was or than I was trying to convince myself that it was. And
Mm.
so I would say that those first few days were really hard, not having her near me, having to like travel back and forth, and then just questioning, what is the rest of her life going to look like, and
Yeah.
what does that mean for us, and where do we go from here? Because we had no idea.
I can imagine that when that nurse said that, that really, like you said, like reality really was hitting. Like, she's so fragile, I can't hold her.
Yeah.
And especially where you're making all the efforts to try to have as normal as possible of a bonding experience with her, right? Like walking across the
Hmm.
hospital and waking up and nursing her. And then for that, like huge, like you can't even hold your baby. And like I'm not gonna lie, like I don't know if you felt this when listening to like my solo episodes. I talk about Kimball when he was first born, where I couldn't hold him either because he was too fragile.
Hmm.
Because I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, like that is bringing me back to that. That's such a, I don't know, that's just such a tough situation for a parent to be like, you can't
Yeah.
hold your baby because you might hurt them by holding them. Like that is just
Yeah.
so bizarre and
Hmm.
hurtful and all the things.
Yep. And I will say our day nurse was amazing. And when he came in, he was like, oh my gosh, no, I want you to hold your baby.
Mm,
You need to hold your baby. You need to be close to her. She needs you right now. Um, and like, that's what's going to be best for her is being with you and feeling that
mm,
you're here for her. And so he was very, very kind as to like help us just very gently pass her into my arms and position her just the right way so that we
Mm.
weren't like putting any undue pressure on any of her limbs. And so that was huge. But yeah, it was
Wow.
really tough those first few days.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that nurse. Yay. Like
Yeah,
that
I know.
I bet that was so like the opposite of what happened to like right like the
Yes.
negated that feeling of like I can't hold
Yes.
her to be like, "Oh, I'm actually very needed as her mom. Like she needs me." Instead of like
Mhm.
you're going to hurt her. Don't hold her.
Yes. To this day, I still like remember his face. Like, I don't think I'll
Mm,
ever forget that face because that was like my little glimmer of hope when he
yeah.
said, "No, she needs you right now. You're going to do this." I was like, "Thank you."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you need to feel needed, especially when they're in
Mm.
the NICU.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, those days after we left the NICU and the PICU finally, but that like month to 2 months afterwards were probably the hardest part of like her entire journey. Like those early days were tough, obviously, just kind of processing everything. But I don't know if you know this, genetic testing results. Well, you probably know this. Genetic testing results don't come back for like 6 weeks.
Mhm.
So we had, the next 2 months to really like, it felt like we were just sitting in limbo. Like we didn't know if osteogenesis imperfecta was really her diagnosis. We didn't know if there was something additional going on. We had no idea, but we were still, I think, just confused. So she came home with a broken arm and obviously that rib fracture that had healed. As soon as we got home, probably like after a couple days, we realized that her leg was broken.
Mm.
And what had happened was that when she was in the hospital, there was a nurse who came in who was covering for one of the other nurses who didn't realize that she was fragile and had lifted her up by her legs to change her diaper. And I knew that she started crying in that moment and she was fussy thereafter. And then obviously over like the next couple of days, I realized like she's not moving her leg. And yeah, so she had broken her leg. So we
Mm.
went, to the ER and everything, and it was the whole thing. And then the week after that, my husband had picked her up just to hold her up to his chest, and she broke her other arm. And
Oh
so that
gosh.
was another ER trip. The week after that, then the small splint that was on her tibia, which was the leg that the nurse had broken. I think she had moved her leg, and the weight of it was just too heavy that it broke her femur. And so on and on like that. I mean, I could keep going, but like
Wow.
for those first 2 months, it was every single week she was fracturing another limb to the point where after those 2 months, she was basically in like a full body cast. Like she was just completely wrapped up and healing in all her limbs.
Mm.
And so obviously all hope that we had that it wasn't brittle bones disease, like out the window. We're like, okay, it's definitely
Mhm.
what it is. And then we got the official diagnosis at the end of that like really long stretch of fractures. So that was really
Mm.
hard. And obviously we were completely new. And so we went into what do we do from here? How long does it take for everything to fracture? And at that point, we had gotten like almost terrified to hold her in our bare arms. And so for a while, we would hold her like on pillows or blankets that we would wrap around her to make sure that she was as safe as possible. So it was just a lot of a learning curve
Mhm.
and just a lot of emotions during that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I can't. It reminds me of that saying, like, I don't know if you've heard this, but like when you have like a shy grandpa and you're like, here, hold the newborn. And they're like, oh, I don't know. I can't do that. And they're like, don't worry. You won't break them. It's like,
Yes.
yeah, you like literally by holding her, like she was breaking. And I imagine so
Mm-hmm.
many intense emotions over that. And knowing that it was painful for her. Like, how was
Mm-hmm.
that, like, specifically that aspect of it, like knowing the pain that she was in? What was that like for you?
That is the worst part of it. And I think at the end of the day, that will always be the part that I struggle with. Like knowing that, she'll use a wheelchair, or knowing that she's behind on developmental, whatever it may be, all that other stuff that comes with her diagnosis is just, it's just stuff. But like at the end of the day, the one thing that I will always struggle with is the pain that she goes through. I will say she is the toughest kid, the toughest person that I've ever met in my life. She will, even to this day, break something, and the next day she's smiling and laughing. And like this last time, she broke her arm, and within hours she was laughing at something that dad was doing that was funny. Oh. So she has a lot of resilience. I think kids with OI tend to be very resilient, and they have to be. But yeah, that was really, really hard for me, was knowing that, she's human. Like just because she has OI doesn't mean that she's not still feeling every fracture that comes by. So
yeah. In talking to a few other parents, like, and it's not the same thing, but a lot of us have noticed, like, wow, their pain tolerance is like really high. Like, man, I would be really upset. Like they just like fell and, whatever, bleeding, and they just like jump up and keep going. And it's kind of like, obviously there's an amount of gratitude that they're resilient, but I think it also is a little heartbreaking, because you're like, like that resilience has happened because you've been through way more than you should have. Like, it's not fair that you have to be that resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. And what really hurt my heart, especially during those early days, was that she was so tiny, and I was so upset that this was her introduction to the world, was just like, fracture after fracture after fracture after fracture. And it felt like I kept like wanting to tell her, like, this isn't it, like, this isn't it. Like, it's going to be okay. So yeah, it was so tough.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like, just her resiliency that she has, and the way you talk about how she bounces back and is happy and laughing again. Like, I feel like she's learning that, right? As she grows, it's like, yeah, the pain and that suffering is not all there is to life. Like, daddy can still make me laugh. And, just, again, I don't know what it is. There's something kind of heartbreaking about like that resiliency, but also so reassuring. And so, I don't know. And I know they're not here to inspire us, but it is inspiring to be like, wow, like I can be more resilient too. Has that affected you as her mom to like watch her resiliency and what she's gone through?
Yes. I mean, I still struggle to this day with every fracture that she has. Like I've yet to see her fracture something without me at least having like a good, like 1 minute of like, just let the tears fall down and then pick yourself back up. I'm getting better at it, I will say, but it's always hard, as moms, like we worry when they're sick. We worry when they have a runny nose, we worry about these things. And so it's a different level when I know that she's like broken her arm or like broken her leg, and it's just tough. But I think the amazing thing is that it has made our family really resilient and very thankful. I would say extremely, extremely thankful, and like more attentive to the moments that we have that don't include any physical pain. Like I remember last year on my birthday, and so she was, gosh, I don't know, like 6 months old. It was the first time that I had ever held her in my bare arms to feed her, and she fell asleep in my arms. And I just remember just being so insanely thankful and thinking like, I'm sure this is nothing to most moms. Like they hold their babies and they feed them and they fall asleep in their arms and it's nothing. But this is like the most incredible thing that I've ever experienced. And I feel like little things like that, like it's taught us to realize that there are hard things that happen, but those good things that often go, I feel like, unnoticed by us, we just like bask in them. And I try to do that every single time. like the other day I was driving and she was in my back seat and I could see her in like the little baby mirror, and she was, playing with her feet and just happy, and she was splint free and everything was good. And I had a Starbucks and I was driving us home. We were listening to Christmas music and I was just so content. And I just remembered, I was like, I need to take a second and just be thankful for this right here. And so, yeah, I think her resiliency has not only taught us to like be more resilient, but further than that, I think it's appreciating all of the amazing little moments in between, because those have to outweigh all of the bad stuff or the hurtful stuff that happens. Like it has to. And I want her to go into life feeling that way. I want her to go into life appreciating all of that and letting all of those good moments outweigh any pain that she's going to go through, that we know she will.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I was literally like this morning, I was like writing in my journal and I was like literally thinking about this very thing of like the effect that heartache and longing and like just pain, like the effect that that has on the moments that you really are longing for, I guess. Like in where you have the moment where she falls asleep after you've breastfed her and life is just feeling really good, right? Like that in your expectations of her birth, right? That should have happened like in like the day or two after she was born. But because it took so much longer and there was so much heartache in between, and I don't know, I just feel like that really can add this really incredible depth to those experiences. Like it's not just like oh, how cute, look how sweet, let's take a picture, moving on. Like it is like this momentous thing that, like you say, if you choose to savor it, it feels just, I mean, I don't think you could have it any other way. And I think it's hard to go as far as to say like, I'm glad that she fractures all her bones, right? Like I don't know that you could ever really say that. I don't know that I would ever say that. But like to recognize that depth that it brings to life in those little moments, like you say, that normally would just pass by and be like, yeah, it's expected, life is good. But because of all the heartache and the pain and, moments where it's really hard, it makes those moments really stand out, I guess. It's like the contrast of the darkness and the light.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, like it's one thing that I've learned from her and that I want her to also learn is, and I think this is just in general for humans, because everyone has their own heartache, everyone has their own pain. It looks different for everyone. So ours will look very different than obviously y'all's. And at the end of the day, being able to really, really feel the good ones so that the hard ones aren't as, I don't know, not that they're not as difficult, but like, so that they don't end up defining your life and how you feel about life.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is easier said than done, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe even different phases of life are easier to feel that way. Cause I'm sure like, at least for me, and I'm sure for you, in like the first few months, that would have probably just been like, oh, right now I'm just really upset, and I need to just be upset. So this could be the major part of that darkness that the light will contrast with. But like right now I'm just upset. And, and letting those good moments come naturally and not force it too much too. Cause what I read this quote where it was like, gratitude is not the Tylenol for grief, I think is what it said. And I was like, yeah, like if we force it, then it can feel like you're just like numbing out the pain. But like those moments can truly come on their own and like in their own glorious splendor of like, wow, this feels so good.
Yes, absolutely. Like you said, it's the contrast. Like I think it just makes those moments shine a little bit brighter, or like you want to feel them a little bit deeper, which I think is cool.
Yeah, totally. I think it's hard to, to really articulate, but I totally resonate with what you're saying. And I'm sure a lot of people listening right now are like, yes, I know what you're talking about. Like those sweet moments of like, I just need to like bask in this right now.
Yes.
So obviously, so we've been talking a lot about like how your life has changed and you have changed. I would love to hear how your relationship with your husband has evolved or been affected by, everything with Julianne?
Yeah. Um, well, thank God. And I really think that, my husband was specifically chosen for me. He is, my husband is the nerves of steel. He just is not rocked. I mean, all through those 2 months, it was funny actually, when he came home from the NICU to like pick up clothes or whatever it was while we were still in the hospital, those early days. And my parents were at home taking care of our dogs. And my mom obviously was a wreck, and she was confused and worried and all the emotions. She said that it gave her a lot of comfort when my husband came home to pick up clothes, and he said, "We're great. Oh, she's fine. Oh, Julianne's going to be fine. Oh, she's so tough, and we're great. Don't worry. Like, please don't worry about us. We're going to be okay. We're going to get through this." And he's just that kind of person, like all throughout, everything that we've gone through. And like I said, like Julianne was laughing after she broke her arm because dad was doing something funny.
Yeah.
Like, and why is he doing something funny? Like at that moment, I'm like freaking out, and I'm sad, or I'm worried, or I'm like stressed out because I'm like, let's wrap this, and et cetera, et cetera. We have to dose the pain meds, and, I'm jumping into nurse mode. And my husband is sitting there making her laugh. Like, that's just who he is. And, he's a shoulder to cry on for me, and always, always, always keeping it positive and keeping it light if he can. So I think it's strengthened us a lot. I will say, in those early days, it was testing. Like, it really was testing. And I think any mom and couple can attest to that it is tough. Like, it's really tough to go through that situation. And my husband and I had just gotten married in May, and our daughter was born that following April.
Oh my goodness.
So we were new to marriage, and then we were thrown in the fire. And, you really find out like how people react to things. And a lot of the times you react differently to situations. And there were definitely times where my husband's positive, light attitude frustrated me, because I was like, I'm brokenhearted, and I want you to be brokenhearted with me. And, he gets through it by looking at the bright side. And sometimes I just want to wallow. So it's tough, but thankfully, we worked through it, and we just knew that we had to be there for Julianne, and we wanted to be there for each other. So I think it's been good overall, but it definitely was hard.
Yeah, no, that's so real. I love that. Because like you say, we all need different things when different things are happening. And I think that's such a good example of that. Like, he needed the lightness. You needed to really like be there, like in that heaviness, and to work through that. And so, I can see why there would be frustration, like with him, like, hey dude, I need to be sad right now. I want you to be sad with me. Like, let's do this together. And like, you don't even care maybe. And then like, he might've felt like, dude, you're dragging me down. I'm trying to be light and happy. This is what I need. And I can totally like, I think that's so relatable. And I think recognizing, like you did, that you needed different things can go a really long ways. Cause then you're like, oh, well, we're just different, and that's okay. But it's still really hard.
Yeah. Well, and again, thankfully, we learned to communicate about that stuff so that we can get through it together, rather than apart. And it's, it came down to, if I need a hug, I'm just going to say, I need to cry and I need a hug. And he was like, okay. And I will respond in that way. And if you need me to, be a little happier, do something funny, make me laugh, and then we can, and we can do that. So I think, like you said, it's trying times. It's definitely hard, but thankfully we were able to like kind of find a happy medium there.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, what a steep learning curve where like you
Mhm.
previously you mentioned that you got pregnant 3 months after you got married,
Yes.
but also like to be thrown into like pregnancy, even if it's a typical good pregnancy, like that's hard. And then for Julianne to come into the world the way she did and with her diagnosis and like just learning, I don't know, you're learning the diagnosis, you're learning marriage, you're learning like first time parenting, like
Mhm.
holy cow, that is a lot all at once.
Yeah. I'm not kidding. We were learning all of it. And it was overwhelming at the time. Because, like you
Mhm.
said, we had just gotten married. And we originally were the people who were like, we're not going to have kids until, we've had like at least 3 years to like
Mhm.
travel the world and whatever else, like silly stuff we thought we were going to do. And, and then, immediately we got pregnant with Julianne, but we were excited about it. But, it's like learning marriage. And then on top of that, learning pregnancy is already tough.
Mhm.
And then right after that, learning that, we're in this medical parenting world now was, a whole other layer. And we were learning not even just about the diagnosis and like what that means for us, but on top of that, I felt like we were in like nurse training
Yeah.
because we had to learn dosing. We had to learn how to splint an infant's leg, how to splint an arm. What materials do we need to have on hand at home for that stuff? We had a couple moments where we just looked at each other and we laughed and we were like, did you ever think that we would be sitting here like splinting our infant child's leg?
Yeah.
Like, it's just wild to think about. So
Yeah.
yeah, we were learning all this stuff all at once, and it was a lot.
Yeah. I think that learning curve of becoming nurses and parents, like
Yeah.
it really is a whole different type of parenting. Like you can look at your friends or your peers or even like how you imagine parenthood to be and just be like, this is so
Hmm.
different. And yet it's also exactly the same, right? Like the relationship with your child and how much you love them and like a lot of the things that go along with like typical parenting, I think you get all of it. And so it's a lot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And we still had the typical parenting stuff because my husband had to go back to work, shortly after she was born. So it's like, on top of everything, the ER visits and all the other stuff that we were handling, my husband was still going to work in the morning
Mhm.
and we were taking turns at night feeding her and feeding her bottles and stuff. So yeah, it was definitely a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a different flavor of the parenting stuff, you would have to do anyway, but like, cause she still needs food and,
Mm-hmm.
diaper changes and all that. But then like, also don't break her leg while you're changing her diaper or feeding her. So,
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
well,
See.
I would love to end with what you wish you could have told yourself the day at the NICU when you found out that she probably had this genetic syndrome.
Um, I think I would tell myself to wait and get to know her because you're underestimating how strong she is and how strong you are and how strong your family is and how much God loves you and how strong he is. And these are just things that I didn't have perspective on that caused for a lot of anxiety and fear surrounding her diagnosis and what that meant for her future. But now, having had time to really see all of those things that God placed in her soul and her spirit, and seeing those really just bloom, and seeing how resilient and strong and kind and beautiful she is just as a person, there's just not a doubt in my mind that she is going to grow up to know her value and her worth, and that she will be able to handle every obstacle that OI brings to her life and every obstacle that comes in her life that's not related to OI.
there's not a doubt in my mind that she will be able to handle those with strength and with grace because I know who she is. So I think if I could go back and give myself a little bit of that perspective and say, look, I know you're looking down at her and she's this tiny little baby laying in a NICU bed, but she is so much stronger than she looks. And you are so much stronger than you feel right now. And really, really good days are to come. Like, yes, it's still going to be hard. There are still hard times. Some of those you'll get to go through together, and some of those Julianne will have to handle on her own as she grows. But I just know that there are really, really beautiful days, and you have a beautiful, beautiful child, and it's gonna be okay.
Oh, I love that so much. That really resonates. It's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your story and your experiences with us. This is such a great conversation.
Of course. No, I'm happy to. Thank you.
You can find adorable photos of Kim and her family on the website, therarelifepodcast.com. She also has a plethora of cute photos with her daughter on Instagram, and I'll put links to her Instagram account and mine in the show notes if you're interested in that. Check out my Facebook group, Parents of Children with Rare Conditions. It's a great supportive community. There's a link in the show notes for that as well. Join us next week for Kim's special topic episode, all about how her faith in God was impacted by her journey with Julianne. We go really deep, and I hope you join us. See you then.